tonight are going to be, gather in the forum room at 7:30 tonight, and we're going to be walking around town to give people an opportunity to give. So we'll leave bags at people's houses. We'll warn them. We'll knock and see if they're open to this. We'll leave bags at people's houses and ask them across the course of the week to fill it with needed goods for the ENKA pantry. And then the following week, we'll go around and collect them. That's our plan for this evening. Giving people an opportunity to give. And that's also what we're doing here during our pledge drive, just giving all of us an opportunity to give, encouraging the spiritual virtue of generosity, you might say, which I talked a little bit about last Sunday, being one of the very powerful tools for addressing the deadly sin of pride, right? According to the desert fathers and mothers, generosity is one of those great tools, as well as gratitude. Gratitude is one of those tools. You can't have a prideful heart and a grateful heart. They don't really go together, nor does generosity and pride. They usually undermine one another. So last week it was the prideful Pharisaic Jew that Jesus contrasted with the humble tax collector Jew. And we heard that in the kingdom of God, the humble will be exalted and the exalted humbled. And this week we have another story of the humbled and the exalted in the midst of political, economic, and environmental strife of the first century Mediterranean world. And it begins with a drought, the story does. The earth ravaged by a lack of rain. Now the Bible explains why, which is worth noting, why the climate was having this trouble. And it says clearly, quite clearly, that the earth is ravaged because of human sin. Specifically, it describes that Israel's king Ahab is in devotion to other gods, and that's why the drought. It's interesting that whether it's a flood, as in Noah's story, or a drought, as in this one, the Bible seems remarkably comfortable with the notion that humans impact the climate significantly. Not sure why there are so many Christians still resistant to that notion, that our sinfulness affects the earth, that our deadly sins of pride and greed, to say nothing of gluttony and sloth, change our climate. That's baseline, fundamental Christian theology. So due to Ahab's sin, as the prophet Elijah proclaims, the region will fall into drought because you are bending your knee to other gods, to something other than God. And when it happens, Elijah goes from being a state-sponsored prophet feasting in the palace to running for his life in the wilderness, reliant on ravens to feed him. The prophet's plight, speaking truth to power and suffering for it. Whether 2nd century BCE or 21st century, the story seems to be the same. Bad actors in seats of power directing their resources towards bolstering their power and undermining any threats to their power rather than repenting and course correcting. And who suffers for it? The earth does, and the poor, the land, and the powerless. We who have power and greater agency in our lives tend to be better off to buffer ourselves from the effects for now, but not the poor and the powerless. And this is what so many of the stories in our scriptures reveal, is that impact upon the poor and the powerless. And it's the quintessential poor and powerless figure of a widow who we encounter in this story along with her child. And because of the drought, they are dying of starvation. God says to Elijah, go to Sidon, and there you will find a widow who will take care of you while he's, political exile. He's running from Ahab and Jezebel. And Elijah says, wait a minute, Sidon is the very heart of the Phoenician world where Ahab has put a bounty on my head. You want me to go there? And God, after dealing with the likes of all these patriarchs, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, isn't surprised at being second-guessed, right? Questioned again and again. Are you sure, God, about this? Right? Though we can imagine God's impatience has grown rather thin, or his patience has grown thin into impatience by this time. Yes, to a widow in Sidon. Must I repeat myself, Elijah? So Elijah goes and finds the widow at the gate of the city and asks her for a cup of water. And she's generous enough that she turns to do that. And then he asks, oh, and also bring me some bread, would you? So this widow, this poor, marginalized woman who is fighting for her life and the life of her son in a famine, looks to Elijah and resists. She's like, are you kidding me, man? All I have left for myself and my child is a handful of flour and a smudge of oil. You caught me as I was going home to make what little we have left for us, and then we are going to die. Imagine the state of a desperate mother like that, trying to feed her child on what little she has left. I would guess that line was delivered with a fair amount of exasperation. You want water? You want bread? The mother, this widow, she who was impoverished by her social standing and suffering the consequences of the sin of those who sat in halls of power, does not acquiesce so quickly to this man asking more of her. Until Elijah says, okay, if you do this for me, the Lord, the God of Israel, will ensure that your jar of flour will not run out, nor your jug of oil will run dry for the remainder of the drought. And she says, deal. She believes and turns for home, and that's exactly what happens. Hers was an act of generosity, an act of faith. Because she didn't know if what Elijah claimed could be trusted, but she goes to make what little bread she has, and out of that generosity, she saves not only Elijah's life, but her own and her child's, thanks to the fulfillment of God's promise. The handful of flour becomes abundantly filled jar, and the dregs of her oil becomes an overflowing jug. It's a beautiful story. We, as Christians, believe that the creator of this world, creator of this universe, has as one of her qualities, one of her essential qualities, generosity. We've come to understand that because Jesus, the revealer of God, was profoundly generous. And we've come to believe it because the earth in all her abundance is a generous earth, no? And in the experience of our own lives, there's just something essentially generous about this existence. Isn't there? Even with all of its issues and struggles and pains and sorrows, there's something essentially generous about this existence. Gift. It's gift. Abundance and generosity. It's built into the very fibers of creation. Sparsity, scarcity, miserliness is largely something human-derived, coming from human sin, and is evidence of the way the world is not supposed to be. It's a world built and designed to run on abundance and graciousness, and the flow of that, the flow of what we receive flowing out of us in generosity to others. The opposite of that is some kind of twist or taint that's just not right, that we really sense is just not right and not meant to be. Evidence of the fallen nature of this world, or you might want to say the unfinished nature of this world. So therefore, our work as people of faith, as people who believe in this God of generosity, is to lean into and align ourselves with that which is generous and abundant. Lean into and align ourselves with that which is generous and abundant. And maybe even and maybe especially when we least feel like it. When we feel the kind of instinctual, like, oh, circle the wagons. When it seems most inappropriate to be just wildly generous. When we feel most like grabbing hold and hanging on to what is ours, that's the time where the discipline of leaning into the generosity comes. And then, like the widow of Zarephath or the mother and child in Maggie's beautiful storybook, just that book needs to be read by a Southern-speaking person like Maggie, doesn't it? I mean, hearing her Southern accent as she read it was beautiful. But like the widow of Zarephath and the mother and child in Maggie's book, they were generous despite their poverty, right? They leaned into that. And they aligned themselves then with the generosity of the flow of existence that's meant to be like that. And as a result, they don't go and die, but the generosity folds back onto them because it's the way the world's supposed to work. So in that spirit, we want to give you here at our church during the stewardship season the opportunity to give and be generous as a spiritual practice, as a part of your connection to our community, as a way of aligning with the way the world is supposed to work and to get right into that natural flow of God's abundance. And so as we do every year, we are asking you to consider what you might give to the life and work and well-being of this beloved community here in Winchester. If you pledge what you think you might be able to give for the coming year, then we can develop a budget that allows us to do the ministries that we all so value. That's the gift of pledging your sense of what is possible to give in the coming year. But that's not all. Okay, this pledge drive, we're going to do a little more. Invite you towards a little more. Lean into that generosity. Everybody's like, what are you asking, Will? All right, this pledge drive is a double offering in this way. It's a dual threat, you might say, to our tendency to get stuck in scarcity thinking. We want to ask you to consider what you might pledge, and we also want, in honor of the widow of Zarephath, to invite you to make and offer a loaf of bread to someone in need to accompany your pledge. How's that? Good idea, huh? That's our theme, a handful of flour, a heart full of gratitude. And a pledge to the church and a loaf of bread to a friend. A financial gift to the church and a gift of bread to someone who could use it. That's the idea. I'm leading by example here. Tracy and I will make our annual pledge to the church, and this past week, dun-dun-dun, look at that loaf of bread. I mean, I don't bake bread all that often, and I have to say I'm very proud of this. It's called Polish babka. Tracy's mother's side of the family is Polish, and her grandmother has this recipe for Polish babka. And I made a bunch of loaves of it and gave one to our neighbor and another to a daughter, and then the other daughter was like, what? So I gave one to her too. And our third daughter is too far away. I think it would be stale by the time it got to her. But that's the bread I made. And I have to say, it's such a wonderful contemplative practice for those that aren't in the practice of baking bread. That way, and this way, the idea here is that we not only receive into our church community financial commitments to sustain our church in the coming year, but also we send out into our neighborhoods and communities expressions of abundance, of love, of care through loaves of bread. And we'll have on the little pledge card an opportunity to say what you pledge, and then beneath that is an opportunity to say, I gave my loaf of bread to a neighbor, or what have you. Or to the outdoor church could be a way of giving, or to the dwelling place. Who stirs in your heart when you think, I want to give somebody a loaf of bread? But I don't make bread, you say, Will. I'm here to tell you that God will meet you in your kitchen with your good intention, and you will be amazed at what you can do, all right? I'm just saying, I doubt your bread will look as nice as that, but them's fighting words is what Karen said. But I bet you it'll amaze you. And yeah, I mean, you can be as involved as you want, like make sourdough, or you could get, a baking box from Trader Joe's of that really good pumpkin bread and, put that together too. But I don't have time to make bread with everything else, Will. It's amazing what that handful of time that you do have can produce when it's given towards generosity. So that's the invitation to you, and I just invite you to consider what our community of faith means to you, and to consider what you can contribute to a community that is filled with goodness and healing, compassion and care, faith and service, friendship and love. And join us in experiencing together what the offering of a handful of flour given out of love to the people around you can do for your own sense of gratitude and well-being in your life. Gratitude and generosity, generosity and gratitude. They are beautiful antidotes for what ails this world. Amen.